Today's webinar is entitled Forgetting to Drain the Swamp and Other Lessons of Running Your Own Creative Business. Our presenter is Doug Eymer, a 1984 alumnus of the College of Imaging Arts and Sciences. Doug was born in Bradford, PA, a former oil boom town and home of the iconic Zippo lighter. Upon graduation from RIT, with nearly $250 in his pocket, he packed his black '77 Chevy Nova, the Nunmobile, and headed east. It was at Eymer Design Associates, a nationally known Boston corporate identity firm, that he met Carnegie Mellon University Graphic Design School graduate Celine Carlo. Doug says, "We each sat next to chain smokers. Once we orchestrated the move to bring our desks together, the rest was history." During the economic downturn of the mid-'80s, the duo formed Eymer Design, a traditional and new media design communications firm. For over a decade, Eymer Design brought intelligent, incisive design to the development of branding strategies, corporate image and identity systems, sales and marketing collateral, annual reports, packaging, interactive marketing, and website development, in turn receiving international recognition as well as many awards. Over the years, Eymer Design developed a strong working relationship with the large Boston agency PARTNERS+simons. In early 2000, Partners realized the benefits of joining forces and acquired Eymer Design, forming Eymer Design Laboratories at PARTNERS+simons. In spring of 2004, Doug left PARTNERS+simons and started Eymer BRAND Laboratories+Think Tank. These days, Doug can be found working on a variety of creatively motivated projects for a smattering of fun and interesting clients. He resides in the Massachusetts coastal town of Cohasset with Celine, 2 teenage sons, and his canine personal assistant, Olivetti. Doug is past president and former board member of the Creative Club of Boston. He frequently lectures on branding and the design profession. He currently sits on the board of the Cohasset Library Trust, Situate Cohasset Youth Football League, and Massachusetts Cultural Council. He is also a founding board member of the Cohasset Education Foundation. And now, we'll turn it over to Doug. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Mission Control, can you hear me? Good
You're
morning.
on, Doug.
Forgetting to drain the swamp. That comes from a business card. When I was growing up in Bradford, Pennsylvania during my high school and college years, I worked for a private country club for the golf pro. And over the doorway to the back room, Bud Jenkins hung this little business card that said, "When you're up to your neck in alligators," I'll switch to that, "it's easy to forget that the initial objective was to drain the swamp." And believe it or not, I think about this all the time, and it usually comes after, like, breaking my back on a project, spending many, many hours, a lot of sleepless nights. I get the project done, and the first thing I think about is, what am I going to do now? What about new business? And, it just always pops into my head. So that's why I selected that as the title for my presentation. I thought that I would first of all just sort of give you sort of a quick timeline of where things progressed. In this graphic in the bottom left-hand corner is me in 1984 at RIT. I think we're up along Lake Ontario somewhere. This is my friend Kent. I show this to my boys a lot, and they look at it, and their reaction is usually like, "Oh my God, Dad, that was you?" So I graduated in 1984. Like Lydia said, I moved to Boston, worked for Eymer Design Associates for a year. And I have to mention that I had a great education at RIT. They gave me all the skills that I needed. I had a great portfolio, thanks to Roger Remington and the rest of the great teachers at RIT. But I also, while I was at RIT, I took a class in mechanical design, or actually building mechanicals, because at the time we didn't have computers. I know that seems like a long time ago, but mechanical artwork is what you had to put together to send to printers. And when I was at Eymer Design and I was going through my interview and presenting everything, I could tell that they were impressed with my portfolio, but it was when I showed that I could do mechanicals, they realized that I could start the next day. And that's basically what happened. I went from like a 1-week trial period to a 2-week trial period, and finally I was hired. From there I went to McCormick & Dodge, which was a corporation. It was a great place. I worked within a creative group with other designers and writers, and we did all their brochures, but also did a lot of the presentations, helped put together corporate beer parties and things like that. It was really great, but I soon realized that maybe it was too much of a country club, and I had the opportunity to leave with sort of a band of misfits and went to work for a company called McGlinchey & Paul, which was a high-tech PR firm that really was sort of a group that left McCormick & Dodge and founded this. This was back in like 1987, and at the time we were working for a lot of startup companies. Celine at this time, Lydia mentioned Celine. We had met at Eymer Design, and we kind of went separate ways. I mean, as far as business goes, we were spending 24 hours a day with each other, and we decided we should probably, see if we liked each other if we went in sort of separate directions. So Celine was working at Bose Corporation, and to make a long story short, in 1989, we both found ourselves out of work, and things were pretty tight, and we just decided to set up our own business. And the day after I left McGlinchey & Paul, we went on a doing business meeting at a real estate company that also had a daycare, and we ended up working on a deal with them where we traded office space for work, and that's really when Eymer Design was born. I have to admit, we first named the company Benchley Wentworth because we decided that we wanted something that was a little more waspy, but we realized the benefit of naming the firm after ourselves so that when people met with us, they knew that they were meeting with the big cheeses. At the bottom, once again to the right, you see Celine and I in our space. We ended up moving to this great warehouse space on the waterfront in Boston. It's become kind of chic now, but at the time it was very industrial, and this was our office. And then in the year 2000, you can see sort of the gang that we had together, including at the time our dog Bedoni. In 2000, we got this offer that we couldn't resist, and I moved. Celine sort of went off. We had 2 kids at the time, and definitely that became her full-time job. We still have 2 kids, I should mention, too. But I went to work for a company with 60 people. I became one of the 3 upper management people, in addition to doing a lot of as much creative work as I could fit into my day. But then I soon realized that I was being asked to make decisions on dress code and a lot of human resources issues, and I felt like I was getting pulled further and further away from the creative product. And so I decided at that time maybe it was time to leave and start my own business again. So in 2004 and up until this minute, I've been in charge of Eymer BRAND Laboratories+Think Tank. We're basically a virtual agency in that it's pretty much me at the controls, and I have a network of senior-level people with gray hair like me that I can bring in to work on specific projects. Well, that's sort of a rundown of where I am and how I got here. One thing I wanted to mention, I feel like I came into this career at a really good time because I learned old ways of doing things. You know, we had typesetters, we had wax, we, you know, had to wax galleys down to mechanicals, everything like that. But also, I was young enough so that I was able to make the transition to the computer. In 1987, as my slide says, the Mac entered the creative studio, and it really, really shook things up. The second big event was the World Wide Web catching fire in 1991. I mean, in my mind, I have this picture of, you know, old designers just, you know, as dinosaurs sort of dropping off a cliff, because some people refused to embrace it and waited for things to change, but they were never able to catch up with what was going on. So what's the big deal? With these huge changes, methodologies developed over hundreds of years were no longer relevant. And what I mean by this is, you know, there was the printing press, there was Gutenberg, and there were hundreds and hundreds of years, and there were processes that were put in place. And when you went to work for a company, you learned these processes step by step by step. With the introduction of the computer and then later on the web, new rules were introduced, but they were introduced on an almost daily basis. So, you know, we were flying by the seat of our pants, and things were changing very, very quickly, as they still are today in a way. One of the biggest things was handwork was transferred to untested technology, and while everything was in motion. I mean, we were trying to figure out, we knew the computer was useful, but we had to figure out how it really fit into electronic prepress and so forth. And printers had to learn what we were learning, and you know, we were getting calls from printers saying, hey, we got your document, we got your files, but you have a later version of the software than we have. Could you please send us over all the disks for that? And in turn, everything got really tightly compressed. I mean, up until this point, I was able to mark up a document from a writer, give it to a typesetter who would set the type overnight, and I could go home for the evening. You know, I would often get a call at 1 or 2 in the morning from the typesetter saying, hey, I can't read your handwriting here. What did you mean by this? But for the most part, I was able to pass the job on to somebody else. Well, as things progressed, this was no longer really the way things could happen anymore. So to continue on with what's the big deal, as I mentioned before, these, you know, I refer to them as dinosaurs, but experienced professionals were forced to adapt to a totally new mindset. And these were people that had been in the business for 10, 20, you know, maybe 30 years, and suddenly their whole world was rocked, and they were really given a choice, you know, do I continue doing this? Do I fight it, or do I go and do something else? And, you know, a lot of people went and did something else. There was a consolidation of specific roles which placed more responsibility on the designer. For example, when I first started out and I first got into Eymer Design, I was shooting mechanical artwork, and I was making chromatech and things like that. It was a lot of hands-on work, but there was a piece of the process that I was handling. With the introduction of the computers, the processes sort of joined together, and it became more and more responsibilities were piled on a designer. Especially with the web, technologists became more and more present within design firms, and technologists like engineers have a totally different mindset than designers and marketers, and so there was sort of a power struggle happening. The technologists knew how to code, they knew HTML and so forth, and so we as designers who wanted to design the web the way we wanted to seemed like we were constantly butting heads, and that sort of calmed down over the years. Let me go on. One of the problems we've always had to deal with, and this is like, I love Apple Computer, but sometimes I feel like their assertive high-tech marketing promised instant gratification to eager clients. The same messaging convinced businesses that they could bypass creative professionals in favor of doing it themselves through desktop publishing. And, of course, the first victim of this was quality. So basically what was happening was ads were going on TV, ads were going in magazines to the business community saying, hey, look at this computer, look what you can do with it. And, in a way, it was sort of shutting the designer out of it. We no longer had the control that we once had. And, of course, the first victim was quality. We no longer had the professionals that were trained to set type, the craftsmen. I mean, it was now that responsibility was being transferred to the designers. So the designers could do a fairly good job, but they didn't have that trained skill that the typographers had. That's gotten better, especially with better computer programs. So one of my uber themes of this whole thing is, as a creative professional, you have to evolve. You have to continue to evolve. Things are not slowing down at all. So evolve or perish, or find a job somewhere else doing something totally different. So the first thing I wanted to say, or the first sort of real meaty part of my presentation is making you and your business relevant and sustainable. And I'm thinking in terms of like a 30 to 50 year career run. Here are 4 creative geniuses: Socrates, Tesla, Van Gogh, Melville. Thing about them was they all died penniless, basically. The thing you have to remember as a designer is that creativity in business is not about you. Clients are not paying you for your self-expression. That's a fine artist. They are paying for you to relieve their pain, or basically to help them make money. If you do this successfully, you'll be well compensated. So you may be the world's next creative genius, but from a business standpoint, people must embrace your brand. And what I mean by this is there are many times when I would prefer to go to a meeting with a law firm, being dressed like I am now with my jeans and sneakers and sweatshirt. But there are many times when, as much as I have to fight it, I realize that I have to put on a shirt and tie, I have to wear a suit, I have to wear polished shoes, not because that's who I am, but because it removes a roadblock so that these people will have an easier time accepting me, and they can concentrate on the material that I'm presenting. So I say excessive self-expression may inadvertently prolong your work search. Weird is an extremely difficult sell. It may work in the studio, but it doesn't always work in the real world. And I have to say, as contemporary as I try to be, a pierced nose is distracting and in business inappropriate. I have looked at the portfolios of some very, very, very talented graphic designers, but when I see a ring in someone's nose, my focus goes to that, and I'm totally losing what's being presented. So I know that sounds like I'm really old. Relevance and sustainability, and this is like basically a survival tactic. From the moment you walk in the door, prove that you can make yourself useful immediately. And that's like I was saying, when I went to Eymer Design, I had a great portfolio. I was prepared as a senior designer, but they weren't looking for senior designers that day or that week or for some time after that. They were looking for someone that could go in and fill a role, and that's still important. You've got to have the basics down. Even if you are going into a company and you end up being the receptionist, you know, at least you have to get your foot in the door and, like I said, prove that you can handle even the most basic situations. For as long as possible, place the needs of the organization above your own professional desires. It's not about you, it's about the organization. And eventually, you'll either be rewarded for your efforts or it'll be time for you to move on. I think one thing that's really important, especially with this type of career, is always keep your eyes open for the next opportunity. Things change a lot. You know, we can no longer rely on the 30-year corporate career where you retire and you get a gold watch and, you know, handshakes from everybody. You've really, I mean, especially with creative, as I say here, every creative job has an expiration date. I mean, change is inevitable. Even the best campaigns get tired after a while, and as much as you try to come up with new ideas, sometimes it's better for the organization and for yourself to change. And the last point to make here is never burn a bridge. And I say this because when I first came to Boston in 1984, I kept a notebook of everybody I met with, and from there it's branched off into a tree. And it's amazing. Even today, I can go back to people and talk to them, especially when things are slow. And, you know, by just keeping conversation going and not making enemies, who knows, every once in a while it leads to a new job, just when you need it. One thing that I think that everybody needs to understand as a creative professional is that you need to know at some point during your professional career, and I say through either desire or necessity, you will have the opportunity to strike out on your own, whether you really want to or whether you don't. Like I mentioned, Celine and I, we had talked about opening a business, but in 1989, we knew that we had to do something. And we just picked up our portfolios and made it happen. I titled the next one, and I have to say it in the right way. You, my friends, have a gift. As a creative person, you have been given a wonderful gift. But there are many times when I think people don't really give it the seriousness that it should. You know, they think in terms of what you do as something that they did in art class. It wasn't serious mathematics. It wasn't finance. It wasn't science. And they sort of discount it a little bit. But you are professional. You have a gift. This is something that not everybody has. Just make sure that you are fairly compensated for your work. And, you know, when it comes to so many times you hear, you know, well, why don't you do this for me, and if we like it, we'll pay you. Basically spec work. And as I say here, surgeons are never asked to perform operations on spec. So make sure that you don't. Now, there are times and I work for a lot of volunteer organizations, and instead of writing a check, I usually volunteer my time to help with their marketing. The slogan I've come up with is free work begets free work. And this is something you have to be very careful with. Even until the last few years, I've gone into like volunteer projects thinking that, wow, I'm going to give these people really great work pro bono, and someone's going to say, wow, I really like what this guy can do, and they'll hire me for a paying job. Well, as good as that sounds, and it does make a lot of sense, usually what it gets you is more free work. So what I'm saying here is, even if you're doing work on a pro bono basis, even if it's the best organization in the world, make sure you put a value on it. I'm not saying you have to actually write an invoice, but give them paperwork that shows how much your work is worth, and if they were paying for it, how much they would have to pay.
Doug, let me just interject here 1 minute. We did have a comment from David Austin with regard to that, and he says that once a client sees your work, once he sees your work, it's gone.
What is that again? I'm sorry.
He says that once a client sees your work, the work is gone. Because they've seen your I'm assuming, and David, tell me if we're wrong, I'm assuming because they've seen the result of your creative process, they've seen your idea and your particular perspective on approaching the situation, and at that point you can't claim it's yours anymore. Does that make sense to you? Does that sound like your experience?
I think I can see that sometimes. I mean, it really depends on how ruthless the client is, but I can see that from a spec standpoint. Yeah, I mean, people steal ideas all the time, unfortunately. But I think that's what David's point is. Make sure you get paid for your ideas.
That may be right. He's essentially saying that what you said about people having a gift, that they're paying for your creativity and your mindset in approaching a problem. It's not that they're just paying for the end artwork for an ad or the final files for a website. They're paying for all that creative work that goes into producing that, and clients don't always see it that way.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah, and that's why I think it's also important. Well, I can get into it later, but to really explain what your process is, so that they understand all the ingredients that go into the finished product. But that's a really good point. The next thing I wanted to talk about was employees, and I was going to say the hardest decision in any business is knowing when the right time is to hire the first employee. And I have to be honest, you really have to be careful and drag it out as long as you can, do as much as you can, but then there comes a point where it just doesn't make sense to keep doing what you're doing, and you really need help. This is a very transient business, and I always looked at an employee having a shelf life of about 2 years, and you can't really anticipate any more than that. If you do, and they're great employees, you're very lucky. But you, as a creative business owner, you have to be prepared for a lot of change. The fastest way to transform your business is to hire your first employee. And from a creative person standpoint, to me what that means is you will be instantly promoted. You've gone from being hands-on to suddenly upper management. You've taken on more responsibility. And this is something you need to be comfortable with, because you will be giving up a lot of, or not a lot, but you will be giving up a portion of your creative freedom.
Doug?
Yeah?
We have a question from Dina Gunderson.
Yeah, sure.
And she asks, how do you decide if you want to grow? And when you make that decision, how do you decide between hiring a regular employee versus hiring recurring freelancers?
Well, the first thing is, unfortunately, because of a lot of the tax regulations and so forth, you know, from an IRS standpoint, I mean, we'd all, as business owners, we'd love to hire freelancers as much as we can, because you're only paying them for basically the time they're working on it. The IRS has limitations on that, so at some point, you know, you do need to make the commitment. And there are a lot of restrictions on that. You know, how many hours they spend on the premises, whether or not they provide their own tools, and that sort of thing. So I guess the quick and easy answer is, you know, keep people as long as you can as freelancers. Is that? And then if you really like them, and you know, I think it also depends on the economic climate. In the year 2000, with the whole .com bubble and everything, it was incredibly difficult to find people. I mean, we were looking all over for a senior level designer, and portfolios were really, really hard to come by. And you know, so we were at that time, you know, to sort of to stabilize things, we were looking to hire employees, but you know, that changes from time to time.
Doug, Dina asked back again. Her question is regarding project management, and she says it's hard to find project managers on a freelance basis, and that it's a pretty big area, and she's wondering if there's a way to find the right person to do that. And then we also had a reference from David Austin, who said that he found some information on this in a book that he wished he'd read right out of school, called The E-Myth. But
okay.
Dina's asking about more of a project management basis, and when do you feel like you need to hire a person who would do that, or do you hire someone to do maybe the creative tasks and see if they have project management chops?
Yeah, I think that's it's hard to find the right person, but if you can find a creative person, a designer who understands business and understands the process and put that together, that's extremely important. I mean, once you bring a project manager into the business, and you know, they're very, very important. You know, there are often times when their work could slow down. So if you can find someone who's equally gifted, snatch them up right away.
Dina says something that I think we've all experienced. She says what she really needs is another me.
Oh, totally, yeah. And that's really, really hard. And you know, that goes back to you know, my slide before saying, you know, when you bring in a person, you have to. There's part of you that you have to give up. You have, you know, you have certain qualities and standards, and you have to realize that, you know, no matter how good the person is, it's still not you, and you have to accept that. Anybody else?
Nope. Yep, we're on to Mr. Ogilvy.
Yeah, David Ogilvy, one of the original Mad Men. I've always liked the saying, if each of us hires people who are smaller than we are, we shall become a company of dwarfs. But if each of us hires people who are bigger than we are, we shall become a company of giants. So basically what he's saying is always when you're hiring someone, I mean, we have a tendency to want to be more powerful or have more strength, but always try to hire someone who's more talented than you are, because, you know, that means growth. You move forward. If you do the latter, if you hire people less than you, obviously things start to fall apart. Employees, treat your employees like close family friends. Hang on to the good ones as long as you can. Pretty simple. As far as paperwork, and this is just, and once I think this goes back to the project management, and you know, this is especially true as a designer in today's world, where you need to really wear a couple different hats. Like, for example, when I get a job in now, even before I provide an estimate, I give it a job number. And it's pretty simple. It's like if I'm doing work for, I don't know, Acme Electric, it's AE and then 1401. And that just helps me to get organized. I have a project website, so that's entered. That number goes on the estimate, and it follows it all the way through to the invoicing. And for every project, I develop a proposal, and it's usually step by step. Sometimes it's a pain, and I hate to do it, but going back once again to, I think it was David who mentioned, you know, about work and putting a value on it. This shows people all the different steps that go into a project, that I'm going to do 4 to 6 concepts. I'm going to meet with you. It's going to limit it down to 2 concepts. Then we're going to go through levels of refinement and so forth. It really puts it step by step, so it allows them in their head to say, wow, this must take up X amount of hours. And it's not like, you know, I'm bringing a genie out of a lamp. Always require an initial payment, especially before starting the work, and continue billing as the work progresses. One thing I learned was I used to do a third up front, a third halfway through a project, and then a third at the end. And I changed that on quite a few projects, especially with web projects, because they were dragging on for so long, and there were times when there wasn't money coming in, there wasn't cash flow, which brings me to my next slide, which is cash is still king, but poor cash flow is a killer. And this is where, as a creative professional, and you know, a lot of times this kind of goes against who we are or goes against the whole creative thing, but you really, really need to pay attention to finance. You need to keep in touch with your bank account. You need to know how much is there. You need to know how much is coming in. And you need to know how much you need every month to sustain yourself. And also count on the slow months. I know in New England, the fall is very busy. Winter stays pretty busy, but then in summertime, it really, really slows down, just because the weather's so nice and everybody likes to go outside. Technology. You have to keep an eye on technology. You have to constantly look for ways to add efficiencies to your processes. And like I say here, it's not to be confused with cutting corners. It's just working smarter. So basically, if you can, you know, with really, really tight budgets the way they are, if you can spend the majority of the time doing what you like to do best and where you're most talented, and that's coming up with a creative product, if you can find ways to shorten the time frames on proposals and sort of day-to-day activities like that, you know, by all means, take advantage of it and constantly look for them. Be technically savvy and know that most computers crash during critical project steps, usually around midnight. Printers and projectors, they wait until immediately before major presentations. So with that in mind, when a presentation involves a projector, always bring an extra bulb and a few set of printed copies. It's Murphy's Law every time. The next part of my presentation is building a career life graph, surviving the ever-changing tides of business. embrace change with a passion. This is not a guideline, it's a rule. I mean, if you can't deal with the change, then, you know, there's maybe something else that you should be doing. But things are changing. I mean, within the last few years, we've been still dealing with the whole social media, and we're, as cool as it is and everything, we're all still trying to find out ways to make money from it. One of the things I learned very early on, and this is when we first started our business, you need to build a team of trusted advisors. And what I mean by this is these are not employees. These are, you know, there's Craig Saratani is my benefits planner, who I knew, you know, as soon as we set up our business. But through him, we set up a healthcare, a life insurance policy, which basically became our retirement fund, disability insurance, and things like that. He was my go-to guy for that. And actually, there was a pretty good network. You know, he introduced us to our accountant. Our accountant introduced us to our bookkeeper. We found a computer guru who's great, who, you know, I try to do as much of my own technical support as I can, but there are times when I just can't figure out how to make things work. And that's where I have my friend Steve, who I can call up, and he can help me through any problems. Also, if you have an actual office, having a plumber, electrician, and carpenter on standby is a really good thing. And if you can find a great salesperson, and to me, you know, project managers are great, but a salesperson is key, and if you can find a good one, treat them like gold. You know, once again, we are creative people. We love creativity, but, you know, it's really important to be able to think from both sides of your brain. You know, be creative, come up with great ideas, but also you are a business person. Even as a freelancer or even as an employee, you're a business person and you need to treat things in a business-like manner. It's often hard, but it really pays off. One of the things I wanted to say is beware of the dangling carrot, and this kind of goes along probably with like sort of the spec work idea, but there are so many times when I'll go into a situation and I'm working on a project and it's maybe not going smoothly or it's not like the client anticipated, but you know, you always hear, well, think of all the other work there is out there. You get through this and we're going to give you plenty more. Or if you cut your budget down to this amount and we make it through, think about all the other work. Well, just beware of that. Focus on the work at hand, and then use that as the next step. The next point is, with experience, you'll learn to trust your gut, because it's usually right. If you meet a client and they walk like a duck and they talk like a duck, you know, they're not a chicken. You know, you've got to learn to trust that. If things don't sound right, either call and ask the questions, but don't assume anything. And then, despite what you see on Mad Men, it's really important to eat properly, exercise regularly, and I truly believe in this. Sleep well. Sleep deprivation is something that, you know, we think that as designers it's part of the career, but it's really important to get a good night's sleep. And just keep in mind that most of the original Mad Men are dead. Finally, at the end of the day, make sure you're doing what makes you and your family happy. And just think how lucky you are creating things for a living. It's so cool. I live in a town of financial planners, and all they do is move money around all day. Most of them are driving fancy cars and everything, but I can't imagine myself doing that. I love to work on a project, make things, and I love to see the smile on the face of a happy client. Most of all, have fun. And this is my contact information. I'd love to hear from anybody, and please feel free to reach out and talk to me, and let's stay in touch.
Thanks so much, Doug. We're going to open up to see if anyone else has any questions. This is a great presentation on some of the perils and benefits of running a creative business. It's a little different than some of the other types of hard product businesses. Dina commented saying, I'm lucky and blessed to be in a situation where I can ask the question, how do I say no? I know how to turn down new clients, but saying no to existing and recurring clients is, I'm sorry, it just shifted, is harder. I'm sorry, go up, please. But saying no to existing and recurrent ones is very hard. So the question would be, how do you choose when you have existing clients and you have a situation where you really just need to say, no, I can't do that?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, hopefully you can establish a relationship with a client where they understand that. You have that personal one-on-one. I think it depends on the reason why you can't. What the reasons why you can't handle it. Is it beyond your your knowledge base? I mean, one thing that I've done from time to time when I've come into a situation like that is I've introduced somebody that I know as an expert who can come in. I mean, I make sure that this references, someone who treats business the way I treat business, but, have them come in, introduce them as a partner so that they can help out. And, with the understanding with that particular person that really this client is yours and you're doing them a favor, and, they shouldn't steal them from you.
And Paulina just had a comment for you. She said, thanks for sharing what you have learned in your business. Some really good points, even for the ones that have been doing this for a while.
Oh, thank you.
And we have a question from David Austin. Any thoughts on establishing your value? How do you figure out a good rate?
Oh, that's a tough one. And the worst question, and you hear this all the time from people shopping, is, what is your hourly rate? And I hate our hourly rate. I mean, you sort of, after a while, you sort of learn what the market will bear, and sometimes you have to throw some things out there. Sometimes I feel like I come in too low, but if you have to figure clever ways of throwing numbers out and then being able to make revisions afterwards. For example, if you are too high, you can never go up on an estimate, but and maybe it's a matter of, for example, if I go in, if a client comes back to me and says, you know what, you're $1,000 over what I need, what I have in my budget, then I always build sort of trap doors into my proposals so that instead of maybe showing 4 to 6 initial layouts, I'll do 3 to 4, something like that. I mean, behind the scenes, I'm probably doing the same amount of work, but to them, they can see that something's being taken away and they can understand it. And I can still get the job.
Here's a question regarding actually something that's going on at RIT right now. There's a fund in the Imaging Arts and Sciences College called the Blacksburg Loan Fund. It was established by an alumnus, and it offsets the cost for students in the creative areas of study, photographers, designers, new media people, to help pay for taking actual business classes in the business college at RIT. Is that something that you think is worthwhile for creative people to do, to actually pursue some kind of formal business training?
Yeah, I really do. You know, and it can just be, it doesn't have to be real elaborate. It should be, you know, hands-on, you know, get a good idea of what spreadsheets, you know, how to build spreadsheets, some accounting work and that sort of thing. I know when I was in school, I took a class, a night class from Bob Kerr, who was one of the deans, and he offered a class in running a business, and that was extremely valuable.
Okay, we have another question from Paulina. What if there's a client with a very small budget in retail, but that you know could have great potential? If you have a gut feeling that starting small may lead to something bigger down the road, do you take that?
You just have to make sure that they realize if they have a low budget, you have to realize you have to make them realize from the very beginning that you're giving them a highly discounted rate, and that as much as you want to work on the job, that it's not going to be possible for you to, you know, continually do this. Because, like, once you go in low, then it's hard to raise the bar again. But if you go in there and say, look, you know, this is a special, you know, for a limited time, I can do it for this, but you know, I'm going to have to charge you more later, or you're going to have to go up to my regular fee.
And we have one last question we're going to take from, sorry, can you put that back up there? From Tatiano Torres Peralta. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced that right. This says this is a very good presentation and the information is very useful. How do you treat your employees like family while still keeping that distinction that they are here to work and need to produce? Or is that not something that you feel is something you really have to worry about?
No, I think that's a really good question, and you know, it is hard because I think it sounds kind of goofy, but I think, you know, first and foremost is just openness and honesty, and making sure that you're honest with them and, you know, they're honest with you as far as, you know, what their goals are. And I think if you also establish the fact that, you know, what we're talking about is only your professional career, you know, that we can still, person to person, we can still be friends. I mean, we got to a point where at Eymer Design, and this was, you know, in the year 2000 or so, where we all ate lunch together. Everybody went out and got their lunch, and we all sat together. And it wasn't mandatory or anything, but it just became like a really tight group. I mean, I compare it a lot of times to a, you know, a team, a baseball team, you know, the Yankees, the Red Sox. I mean, you can tell when they're putting that type of product on the field. And, you know, it happens. It can change quickly, but, you know, when it does happen, you just, you know, it's a wonderful thing.
And we have David Austin just again recommending, he mentioned this earlier, that there's a great book called The E-Myth, which is the entrepreneurial myth that he says covers some of these questions. And I'm not sure how a guy from Cohasset listed the Yankees before the Red Sox, but we'll skip over that. We thank everyone for joining today. That's all the time that we have right now. Additional questions can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will direct your questions to Doug. He also provided contact information as well. Note that all the participants today will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's webinar recording. Many thanks to Doug for being our distinguished speaker today, and thank you all, our IT alumni, for joining us for today's webinar. We thank you for taking time out of your busy workday to be with us. By popular demand, RIT webinars are now presented twice a month. Join us for our next installment in the Spring 2014 series on Tuesday, April 1st. That is just next Tuesday, when Stephen Galbraith, the curator of the Melbert B. Carey Jr. Graphic Arts Collection at RIT, will present Treasures from RIT's Carey Collection.